Hey guys, how we doing this week? Hey, something the Lord's really been putting on my heart is parenting. How do I want to be as a parent? How should any of us be as a parent? And over the years, I've been growing I have 5 kids. Yeah, so 5 kids, which means I have 5 opportunities to really screw somebody up, or 5 opportunities to have an awesome blessing in my life for the future and for a lot of other people's futures if we do our job well. So it's super important to me to raise my kids well. And it's not only important to me, it's a biblical principle, raising kids well. So a lot of people have a lot of good stuff out there. I'm just another person, but I know that the people I've learned the most from have pointed me to one thing, and that is, how does God parent? He's the perfect parent, right? He knows exactly what he's doing. He's a good father. And I really believe that God as Lord has been really accepted by the church for a long time, but God as Father, somehow, somewhere along the line, we kind of missed what that meant. And personally, I feel because our own humanity got in the way and we've kind of raised kids wrong, or generations have raised ways where we focus on the wrong things, and that gave us a wrong impression of God. So what is a right impression of God? Well, I want to talk about what a biblical example is, and look, there's a lot more out there, but I'm narrowing it down to 8 things I've learned from the perfect parent, God himself. So the first thing I want to share with you is that God is always kind and calm with us. Look, it says in the Bible, it's very clear that godly kindness is what leads us to repentance. The fruits of the Spirit are patience, love, kindness, gentleness. All those represent God. 1 Corinthians 13, which tells us about love, and God is love, as John writes, tells us about God. There's more of the same. Okay, gentleness, kindness, goodness. What's not in there is anger. What's not in there is frustration. What's not in there is a lot of the things we like to attribute to the Lord. So keep calm and gentle at all times. And look, I know it's hard. I'm human too. But if we speak to our kids in kindness and gentleness, and we hold our anger back, we hold our desire to yell back, they're going to have a much better listening ear to us. There's all kinds of psychological studies about this. And you know what? I don't even need them, because I trust what the Bible tells me, and I trust my own experience with the Lord. I've been walking with the Lord for 22 years now, and I went through my rebellious period, mostly in my 20s, where for years I was partying and not really being a Christian by example, honestly. But you know what the Lord kept doing to me? Kept seeking me out kindly and gently. And that doesn't mean sometimes he's not firm. Of course he is. But it does mean kindness and gentleness are what drew me to him. And that's how he draws all of us. So remember that as parents. Let's remember that first lesson from the Lord. Secondly, I want to talk about discipline, but do not punish. Perfect love casts out fear, because fear has to do with punishment. What does that tell us? Love doesn't punish, because if it did, how could it cast out the fear of punishment? It wouldn't cast out the fear of punishment, and then you accept punishment, right? But Hebrews also tells us that God disciplines his children. I'm a big believer in discipline. And if we're not a child, we don't get disciplined. So what is the difference? Well, punishment is about inflicting pain to create shame or guilt over what we've done. And it just kind of leaves us there. It doesn't do anything with it. Discipline, on the other hand, is correction. It's steering in the right direction. But how does God discipline us? Well, if you actually do a word study in the Bible, that discipline it's talking about is about the words spoken for our ears. So first of all, we know we correct by speaking it. But secondly, especially in cases of rebellion, we gotta introduce consequences. Now, that's not punishment. That's just introducing something that will steer towards a corrected behavior. For instance, my son loves video games. He loves movies, all those things. And look, I love them too. But when he's been really mean to his little sisters for a while and he hasn't corrected himself, sometimes I have to introduce a consequence of, hey son, for the next few days, no games. In fact, I usually set a limit, but also tell them that if your behavior hasn't corrected itself by then we'll talk about whether or not you get them back. But there's a flip side of that too, which is, I believe, a biblical example is that if he corrects it even sooner, and say his consequence was for 7 days, but for 5 days straight he's been awesome, I'll give it back to him early because I want to reward that correction. All that is part of discipline. Finally, discipline is about cleaning up your messes. Sometimes God allows us to, what I'll say is sometimes God covers up our mess. He will, in his goodness, decide that it's time where my kid got it right away, they repented, I'm going to clean up their mess for them. And we don't have to deal with consequences. But most of the time we have to deal with the consequences of our sin, our mistakes. And what God does is he comes alongside us, and he doesn't always take it away, but what he'll do is he'll empower us of how to clean it up. That's yet another thing of discipline. Letting your kids clean up their messes. And sometimes you're going to come alongside them, sometimes you'll do it for them. That's between you and the Lord when you do that. You'll know when it's right to do it. But what it also means is a lot of times my kids, they learn the first time they have to clean up their mess because it's not fun. So that's another great way to discipline. Number 3, never, ever break your promises. Look, there's multiple times in the Bible where it says that God doesn't break his promises. One of my favorites in Joshua where it says he fulfilled every promise he made to the Israelites. And that's just who God is. And you might be thinking to yourself, man, I don't promise my kids much because I know I don't want to set myself up. Well, the truth is, if you say you're going to do something, that's a promise. The Bible says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. And God says the same thing. And then when he looks back on what he said, he calls it a promise. In the moment, he didn't say, I promise this to you. He just said he'll do something. It's considered a promise. We don't ever want to break our promises, no matter what it is, no matter how hard it is to keep. And that teaches our kids that we're reliable and trustworthy and that we love them and value our word. And that is actually going to teach them later about God too. And the other part I want to introduce is that if something happens and we just cannot fulfill our word at that time for whatever reason, emergency, just bad day, whatever it is, then we need to reestablish that it's still going to happen. And then we need to follow through. Now, what that teaches our kids is perseverance. If our kids believe and know that if they stay holding on to the promise and it happens still, they know that perseverance pays off. Now, I want to tell you, there's a lot going on in the world, a lot of curses on my generation, the generation below me, that they don't know anything about perseverance. And I would counter to that they weren't taught it. A lot of parents, look, I'll give them this excuse, even though it's not a real excuse, but the fact is they weren't given the right impression of God either. And if they're not given the right impression of God and they make excuses for breaking their promise, then they'll do it. And we all will do it. And if we're taught that sometimes it just doesn't happen, sorry kid, I said that, but I didn't really mean it, or I said that before I knew what would happen, and we make excuses for not fulfilling our promises. We teach our kids that God has excuses not to, but God doesn't even give us that excuse. So we have no excuse to break our promises, and we need to teach our kids that. And the reason my generation, a lot of the generation below me don't have perseverance is because they were taught that perseverance doesn't pay off. If you teach your kids that perseverance doesn't pay off, they're not going to have perseverance because they'll have no value for it. And so if we really believe we're just supposed to suffer through life until God delivers us, then what good is that? But that brings us to my next one. Constantly reward. God rewards all over the Bible. It's in the Bible multiple times. And even Jesus died on the cross for the joy set before him. He did it for a reward. He gets us. So if we need a reward at every opportunity. Now there's different kinds of rewards. I love to reward my kids sometimes just for being my kids. Sometimes I'm just like, I love my kids and I want to show them they're loved. And so I just choose to reward them, whatever it is. I might take them out to dinner. I might just rent a movie that night, whatever it is. And that's just for who they are. And then there's earned rewards, which are rewards that they're doing something and I tell them, hey, if you do this, you'll earn a piece of candy. If you finish all your dinner tonight, you can have dessert. If you clean your room, you'll get your allowance. It's easy, but it sets a reward before them for them to earn. And that's something they can go through for that. And then there's a third kind of reward that is actually my favorite. It's a reward I do as a surprise. When I catch my kids doing something amazing, something that I've been trying to teach them or hoping they would learn, and they do it, like for instance, just sharing with their brother and sister, something that usually we know it's special to them. If they do such things, I love to just jump in and say, I saw what you did. Here's a reward for that. And that just lets my kids know that they are being watched and loved and doted on and valued. And it also tells them that if we live this way, if we live well, it's going to be a good life. Good things are going to happen. And don't we all want our kids to believe that if you live well, it'll pay off? Of course we do. So constantly reward. My next thing is a little different, but expose them to need. Now, what I mean by this is, look, none of us want our kids to feel pain. None of us want our kids to feel lack. God doesn't want us to feel it. And that's why Jesus says, don't worry about food. Don't worry about clothing. This is all Matthew 6. Because God's going to take care of it. Jesus literally says, do not worry about anything you need. It'll be provided for you. So we're supposed to walk in that. Now, most of our kids, especially in the Western Hemisphere, walk in that. We have plenty of food. We have plenty of clothes. We have shelter over our head. Man, if you're like me, you have too many clothes in the house. So they don't know what real need is. Now, what can happen in that is that's actually how it's supposed to be. However, if there's a comfort level that can come and it can shift things that where desires unmet suddenly seem to be needs, because if all your other needs are taken care of, you don't know that. So how do we combat that? Well, we discipline them by showing them people who actually have need. So if you're in ministry, let your kids minister with you a little bit. See the broken people out there. I know a family that takes their kids on all their mission trips. It doesn't matter how young their kids are, they take them. And their kids see poverty. They see real poverty. And they get that compassion stirs up in them. Just like Jesus, he saw the crowds and he had compassion on them. Well, that's what happens. They see the people and they have compassion, and they suddenly realize that, man, we're rich. And they get that dichotomy is put right before them, and they can really realize, wow, what do we have? And so then from there, they can want to give. Now, my son, I'm so proud of him. He already is talking about what he wants to do in life. He's dreaming about being a Lego designer and all these fun things. But he always says, I also want to build orphanages. In my home, there's a real passion for orphans. There's a real passion for foster kids and helping children. And we've exposed our kids to that need in the world. And already my son's developing a heart for it. So even though he's 9 years old and he's still planning big, amazing dreams for himself, to be honest a little bit, but he also wants to partner with God in helping change the world. Now there's another need that is a little scarier to introduce our kids to, but also needs to be done, is that spiritual needs. And that's darkness. One of our close friends, they have a family member who's a lesbian and who is married to another woman. And yet we don't run away from that. We still have dinner with these people and are around them, and they've seen those girls kiss. And, I don't believe homosexuality is okay or healthy. I should say that more, because I believe God has a better way. But at the same time, I don't want my kids to run. I'm not scared of that, because now I have a chance to talk with my kids about it, to help them understand, like, this is a reality in our world, and how do we love them without judging? How do we process this? Instead of waiting until they're 13, 14, 15 or older, and they're out in the world and they see it with no grid, and now they're messed up. And I want to be the first person to have to communicate these things to my kids. I want to be the person who leads them through it. So we, with wisdom, with God's help, expose our kids a little bit at a time to sin. Now, this doesn't mean watching dirty movies or anything like that, although I'd let my kids watch action. I want to see them seeing good overcome evil, but even that is with wisdom on their age level and maturity level. So, but don't hide everything from your kids, because if you do, well, I'll tell you what, I've seen 3 things happen to kids in my life who are over-sheltered. They either grow up spoiled because they just have no idea what else is out there and they think it's all about them. They grow up scared because they go out into the world from the safe place and all of a sudden they're overwhelmed, or they grow up rebellious. And that comes from well, I never knew this was out here. I never knew this was possible. I want to do this. Why was I not allowed to do this, And we don't want any of those things for our kids, right? So expose them to need at an early age and use your wisdom for each kid of how much you expose them to, but then process it with them as their parent. And so they, as adults, will have a much better grid for what's going on. You have stewarded that in them. The next thing is number 6, encourage them to dream. Psalms 37:4 says, the desires in our heart, like pursue the Lord and he will give you the desires of the heart, basically. I know that's not perfect, but you can look down there and see the perfect translation of that. But anyways, the point is the word desire, when broken down, D is of or from, and sire is father. God has put perfect, pure desires in our hearts, and he wants us to pursue those things. But he wants us to pursue him first and trust him that he will partner with us in achieving the rest. Now, this is really important because each one of our kids, even at a young age, is going to have an idea of who they are and their innocence and purity. They're already moving forward in that. And we as parents have a choice. Do we trust it with God that anything's possible and that they can become who he's made them to be? Or do we go the other route, which is actually partnering with fear and saying, oh, my kids are dreaming too much. This is crazy. No one will ever succeed doing this. I need to steer them into a safe career, a career with a 401k and benefits and a teaching job, whatever it is. And the truth is, if we do that, if we teach our kids to be realistic versus dreaming with God, who is not realistic, sorry, he's not, we teach them that with God, everything is not possible, that some things are possible, but it's going to be based on you. And we just don't teach them to become who they're meant to be. And that is a tragedy. Look, as a pastor, I counsel lots of people. I meet so many of them who don't know who they are. And unfortunately, their biggest wounds most of the time come from their parents, because their parents told them something or put fear in them about who they were, so they never fleshed it out. They weren't allowed to play and pursue and dream. And so they don't know who they are anymore. I know somebody very dear to me who was raised and was a dreamer and had all these ideas, and then their family came along and said, look, based on who you are, who we know you to be, you need to become a teacher. And they set this person up with everything they needed, sent them to school, put them on that path. But the whole time that was not what they wanted at all. And now this person is still walking out their identity and learning who they're becoming. They've come a long way, but they had to overcome that. Versus myself, I was very blessed my parents weren't like that. And look, I know I'm in the minority on this, but I was taught to dream. I was taught that if God puts something in your heart, go for it. Listen to his voice, follow that, and anything's possible. And I cannot tell you how blessed I am to have that, because even though things have been hard for me a lot, even though not everything works out the way I hope it would, I'm so blessed because I'm not afraid to risk. I'm not afraid to go after stuff because I believe that in myself. I believe that about God. And that's really helpful. So encourage your kids to dream. Number 7, easy one, laugh with them. Man, find every opportunity you can to laugh with your kids. Play with them, enjoy them, show them you delight in them. God, this is non-negotiable. In the Bible, it is very clear. God is a God of joy, laughter, gladness. It's one of the 3 pillars of heaven, along with righteousness and peace. Righteousness, peace, joy. Okay? The joy of the Lord is our strength. Don't you want your kids to grow up full of joy and full of godly strength? I know I do. So find every opportunity you can to laugh with them, play with them, enjoy them, watch funny movies with them. Be engaged. I'm speaking to myself here. Get off your darn phone. I got to do that sometimes. Just look at them, laugh with them. Man, there's a study out there. You can Google it. Kids laugh about 300 or more times a day, and parents, it's as low as 15. Now that is crazy. That's not who we're meant to be. Jesus had the oil of gladness on him. Okay? We should be the same. So laugh with your kids. Teach them that God delights in them and God is joyful. Because remember, you are their first introduction to who God is. That's why God put us in their lives, to teach them about Him. Now look, they're going to have their own relationship with Him too, but they are going to view that through the lens of who mommy and daddy were. Remember that. Laugh with them. Finally, be okay with their process. Look, we don't like it when people are not okay with our process, right? It's really hard if we're going through life and trying to get better and people are like frustrated with us and we're not there yet. We know deep inside that we're trying to get better. We need to be that way with our kids. I know it's so easy to be frustrated. I know that there's certain things I've told my kids 100 times and they've corrected in the moment, but then they still don't get it. And sometimes I just want to be like, what are you thinking? But the truth is, they're in process. It just hasn't saturated itself in yet. And a lot of times they even know better and they'll say, I know, thought about that, but they haven't processed it to the heart yet where it actually becomes their actions. Be okay with their process. Treat others as you treat yourself. And you know what's going on inside you. You know why you do things and how you're computing things, and you know what your process is like, and you want people to have grace on you. Well, we need to do the same for our kids. Look, I'm guilty of this as everybody, but sometimes I try to rush my kids in their process and I get frustrated they're not there yet. But the truth is, they're learning to walk out this life just like we are. And I would never get mad at my baby for walking and falling down. Instead, I celebrate each step. Well, and I know our heart is we want people to do that for us too. So we need to do it with our kids. Celebrate each step. And when they make mistakes, when they do childhood foolishness, just from being kids, recognize it as process and be okay with it. God bless y'all. Thanks for checking this out. If you want more on this, I've written a blog on www.goodbyereligion.net. Okay, that's my website. It has my blog there. It's got my videos. Also, my book, Religionless, is on sale at Amazon right now in ebook form. Physical copies will come out soon. So there's more material for you from myself. But aside from that, I'm Paul Christmitz, and have a blessed day. Thank you.